Dr. Harcourt shivered. So, what you're saying is this is a horror podcast? My God, there could be adult language and situations inside.
PseudoPod, episode 870, for June 16th, 2023. The Dancing Partner, by Jerome K. Jerome. Narrated by Alistair Stewart, hosted by Scott Campbell, audio by Chelsea Davis. Hey everyone, hope you're doing okay. I'm Scott Campbell, assistant editor at PseudoPod, your host for this week, and I'm excited to tell you that for this week we have The Dancing Partner by Jerome K. Jerome. This story was taken from Jerome's non-genre novel, Novel Notes, where it is the second half of Chapter 11. The serialization of that chapter first appeared in the March 1893 issue of The Idler. Joachim Jerome, 1859 to 1927, was an English writer and humorist, best known for the comic travelogue Three Men in a Boat in 1889. He wished to go into politics or be a man of letters, but the death of his father when Jerome was 13 and of his mother when he was 15 forced him to quit his studies and find work to support himself. He was employed at the London and North Western Railway, was a stage actor, school teacher, a packer, and a solicitor's clerk. Having some success with comic essays and memoirs, his most famous work was inspired by his honeymoon, spent on a boat on the Thames. He was chosen to edit the Idler magazine over Rudyard Kipling. Among his varied works are a scattering of weird tales and comical ghost stories. Your narrator is the man, the myth, the legend, Alistair Stewart. Alistair is a professional enthusiast, pop culture analyst, writer, and voice actor. He co-owns the Escape Artist podcast and co-hosts both Escape Pod and PseudoPod. Alistair is an Audioverse Award winner, a multiple award finalist including the Hugo, the Ignite, and the BFA, and has won the Carl Edward Wagner Award twice. He writes the multiple award-nominated weekly pop culture newsletter, The Full Lid. Alistair's latest nonfiction is Through the Valley of Shadows, a deep dive into the origins of Star Trek's Captain Pike from Obverse Books. His game writing includes Emmy-nominated work on the Doctor Who role-playing game and the After the War from Genesis of Legend. A frequent podcast guest, Alistair also co-hosts Carrying Into the Void with Brock Wilbur and Jerome Shively. His voice acting credits include the multiple award-winning The Magnus Archives, The Secret of St. Kilda, and many more. Visit alistairstewart.com for all the places he blogs, writes, streams, acts, and tweets. And while we wait for the band to finish its tuning, we have a story for you, and we promise you it's true.
The Dancing Partner by Jerome K. Jerome. This story, commented McShaughnessy, comes from Furtwangen, a small town in the Black Forest. There lived there a very wonderful old fellow named Nikolaus Giebel. His business was the making of mechanical toys, at which he had acquired an almost European reputation. He made rabbits that would emerge from the heart of a cabbage, flap their ears, smooth their whiskers, and disappear again. Cats that would wash their faces and mew so naturally that dogs would mistake them for real cats and fly at them. Dolls with phonographs concealed within that would raise their hats and say, "Good morning, how do you do?" and some that would even sing a song. But he was something more than a mere mechanic. He was an artist. His work was with him a hobby, almost a passion. His shop was filled with all manner of strange things that never would or could be sold. Things he had made for the pure love of making them. He had contrived a mechanical donkey that would trot for 2 hours by means of stored electricity, and trot, too, much faster than the live article, and with less need for exertion on the part of the driver. A bird that would shoot up into the air, fly round and round in a circle, and drop to earth at the exact spot from where it started. A skeleton that, supported by an upright iron bar, would dance a hornpipe. A life-size lady doll that could play the fiddle. And a gentleman with a hollow inside who could smoke a pipe and drink more lager beer than any 3 average German students put together, which is saying much. Indeed. It was the belief of the town that old Gebel could make a man capable of doing everything that a respectable man need want to do. One day, he made a man who did too much. And it came about in this way. Young Dr. Follen had a baby, and the baby had a birthday. Its first birthday put Dr. Follen's household into somewhat of a flurry, but on the occasion of its second birthday, Mrs. Dr. Follen gave a ball in honor of the event. Old Gebel and his daughter Olga were among the guests. During the afternoon of the next day, some 3 or 4 of Olga's bosom friends, who had also been present at the ball, dropped in to have a chat about it. They naturally fell to discussing the men and to criticizing their dancing. Old Gebel was in the room, but he appeared to be absorbed in his newspaper, and the girls took no notice of him. "There seem to be fewer men who can dance at every ball you go to," said one of them. "Yes, and didn't the ones who can give themselves airs?" said another. "They make quite a favour of asking you." "And how stupidly they talk," added a third. "They always say exactly the same things." "How charming you are looking tonight. Do you often go to Vienna?" "Oh, you should. It's delightful. What a charming dress you have on. What a warm day it has been. Do you like Wagner? I do wish they'd think of something new." "Oh, I never mind how they talk," said a fourth. "If a man dances well, he may be a fool for all I care. He generally is," slipped in a thin girl, rather spitefully. "I go to a ball to dance," continued the previous speaker, not noticing the interruption. "All I ask of a partner is that he shall hold me firmly, take me round steadily, and not get tired before I do." "Clockwork figure would be the thing for you," said the girl who had interrupted. "Bravo!" cried one of the others, clapping her hands. "What a capital idea!" "What's a capital idea?" they asked. "Why, a clockwork dancer, or better still, one that would go by electricity and never run down." The girls took up the idea with enthusiasm. "Oh, what a lovely partner he would make," said one. "He would never kick you or tread on your toes." "Or tear your dress," said another. "Or get out of step. Or get giddy and lean on you. And he would never want to mop his face with his handkerchief. I do hate to see a man do that after every dance. And wouldn't want to spend the whole evening in the supper room. Why, with a phonograph inside him to grind out all the stock remarks, you would not be able to tell him from a real man," said the girl who had first suggested the idea. "Oh, yes, you would," said the thin girl. "He would be so much nicer." Old Gebel had laid down his paper and was listening with both his ears. On one of the girls glancing in his direction, however, he hurriedly hid himself again behind it. After the girls were gone, he went into his workshop, where Olga heard him walking up and down, and every now and then chuckling to himself. And that night he talked to her a good deal about dancing and dancing men, asked what they usually said and did, what dances were most popular, what steps were gone through, with many other questions bearing on the subject. Then, for a couple of weeks, he kept much to his factory and was very thoughtful and busy, though prone at unexpected moments to break into a quiet, low laugh, as if enjoying a joke that nobody else knew of. A month later, another ball took place in Furtwagen. On this occasion, it was given by old Wenzel, the wealthy timber merchant, to celebrate his niece's betrothal, and Gebel and his daughter were again among the invited. When the hour arrived to set out, Olga sought her father. Not finding him in the house, she tapped at the door of his workshop. He appeared in his shirt-sleeves, looking hot but radiant. "Don't wait for me," he said. "You go on. I'll follow you. I have something to finish." As she turned to obey, he called after her, "Tell them I'm going to bring a young man with me. Such a nice young man, and an excellent dancer. All the girls will like him." Then he laughed and closed the door. Her father generally kept his doings secret from everybody, but she had a pretty shrewd suspicion of what he had been planning, and so, to a certain extent, was able to prepare the guests for what was coming. Anticipation ran high, and the arrival of the famous merchant was eagerly awaited. At length the sound of wheels was heard outside, followed by a great commotion in the passage, and old Wenzel himself, his jolly face red with excitement and suppressed laughter, burst into the room and announced in stentorian tones, "Oh, Herr Gable, and a friend." Herr Gable and his friend entered, greeted with shouts of laughter and applause, and advanced to the centre of the room. "Allow me, ladies and gentlemen," said Herr Gable, "to introduce you to my friend, Lieutenant Fritz. Fritz, my dear fellow, bow to the ladies and gentlemen." Gable placed his hand encouragingly on Fritz's shoulder, and the lieutenant bowed low, accompanying the action with a harsh clicking noise in his throat, unpleasantly suggestive of a death rattle. But that was only a detail. "He walks a little stiffly." Old Gable took his arm and walked him forward a few steps. He certainly did walk stiffly. But then again, walking is not his forte. He is essentially a dancing man. I have only been able to teach him the waltz as yet, but at that he is faultless. Come, which of you ladies may I introduce him to as a partner? He keeps perfect time. He never gets tired. He will not kick you or tread on your dress. He will hold you as firmly as you like, and go as quickly or as slowly as you please. He never gets giddy, and he is full of conversation. Come, speak up for yourself, my boy. The old gentleman twisted one of the buttons of his coat, and immediately Fritz opened his mouth, and in thin tones that appeared to proceed from the back of his head, remarked suddenly, "May I have the pleasure," and then shut his mouth again with a snap. That Lieutenant Fritz had made a strong impression on the company was undoubted, yet none of the girls seemed inclined to dance with him. They looked askance at his waxen face, with its staring eyes and fixed smile, and shuddered. At last, old Gable came to the girl who had conceived the idea. "It is your suggestion, carried out to the letter," said Gable. "An electric dancer. You owe it as a gentleman to give him a trial." She was a bright, saucy little girl, fond of a frolic. Her host added his entreaties. She consented. Herr Gable fixed the figure to her. Its right arm was screwed round her waist and held her firmly. Its delicately jointed left hand was made to fasten itself upon her right. The old toy-maker showed her how to regulate its speed and how to stop it and release herself. "It will take you round in a complete circle," he explained. "Be careful that no one knocks against you and alters its course." The music struck up. Old Gable put the current in motion, and Annette and her strange partner began to dance. For a while, everyone stood watching them. The figure performed its purpose admirably, keeping perfect time and step, and holding its little partner tightly clasped in an unyielding embrace. It revolved steadily, pouring forth at the same time a constant flow of squeaky conversation, broken by brief intervals of grinding silence. "How charming you are looking tonight," it remarked in its thin, far-away voice. "What a lovely day it has been. Do you like dancing? How well our steps agree. You will give me another, won't you? Oh, don't be so cruel. What a charming gown you have on. Isn't waltzing delightful? I could go on dancing forever with you. Have you had supper?" As she grew more familiar with the uncanny creature, the girl's nervousness wore off, and she entered into the fun of the thing. "Oh, he's just lovely," she cried, laughing. "I could go on dancing with him all my life." Couple after couple joined them, and soon all the dancers in the room were whirling round behind them. Nicholas Gable stood looking on, beaming with childish delight at his success. Old Wenzel approached him and whispered something in his ear. Gable laughed and nodded, and the two worked their way quietly towards the door. "This is the young people's house tonight," said Wenzel as soon as they were outside. "You and I will have a quiet pipe and a glass of hock over in the counting house." Meanwhile, the dancing grew more fast and furious. Little Annette loosened the screw regulating her partner's rate of progress, and the figure flew round with her swifter and swifter. Couple after couple dropped out exhausted, but they only went the faster till at last they were the only pair left dancing. Madder and madder became the waltz. The music lagged behind. The musicians, unable to keep pace, ceased and sat staring. The younger guests applauded, but the older faces began to grow anxious. "Hadn't you better stop, dear?" said one of the women. "You'll make yourself so tired." But Annette did not answer. "I believe she's fainted," cried out a girl who had caught sight of her face as it was swept by. One of the men sprang forward and clutched at the figure, but its impetus threw him down onto the floor, where its steel-cased feet laid bare his cheek. The thing evidently did not intend to part with its prize easily. Had anyone retained a cool head, the figure, one cannot help thinking, might easily have been stopped. 2 or 3 men, acting in concert, might have lifted it bodily off the floor, or have jammed it into a corner, but few human heads are capable of remaining cool under excitement. Those who are not present think how stupid must have been those who were. Those who are reflect afterwards how simple it would have been to do this, that, or the other. If only they had thought of it at the time. The women grew hysterical. The men shouted contradictory directions to one another. 2 of them made a bungling rush at the figure, which had the result of forcing it out of its orbit in the centre of the room, and sending it crashing against the walls and furniture. A stream of blood showed itself down the girl's white frock and followed her along the floor. The affair was becoming horrible. The women rushed screaming from the room. The men followed them. One sensible suggestion was made. "Find Giebel! Fetch Giebel!" No one had noticed him leave the room. No one knew where he was. A party went in search of him. The others, too unnerved to go back into the ballroom, crowded outside the door and listened. They could hear the steady whir of the wheels upon the polished floor as the thing spun round and round. The dull thud as every now and again it dashed itself and its burden against some opposing object and ricocheted off in a new direction. And everlastingly it talked in that thin, ghostly voice, repeating over and over the same formula. "How charming you are looking tonight. What a lovely day it has been. Oh, don't be so cruel. I could go on dancing forever with you. Have you had supper?" Of course, they sought for Giebel everywhere but where he was. They looked in every room in the house, then they rushed off in a body to his own place and spent precious minutes in waking up his deaf old housekeeper. At last, it occurred to one of the party that Wenzel was missing also, and then the idea of the counting house across the yard presented itself to them, and there they found him. He rose up very pale and followed them, and he and old Wenzel forced their way through the crowd of guests gathered outside and entered the room and locked the door behind them. From within, there came the muffled sound of low voices and quick steps, followed by a confused scuffling noise, then silence, then the low voices again. After a time the door opened, and those near it pressed forward to enter, but old Wenzel's broad shoulders barred the way. "I want you and you, Beckler," he said, addressing a couple of the elder men. His voice was calm, but his face was deadly white. "The rest of you, please go. Get the women away as quickly as you can." From that day, old Niklaus Giebel confined himself to the making of mechanical rabbits and cats that mewed and washed their faces.
Well done. You survived another story. We tend to focus on the killer robot because, well, it's trying to kill us. People have a tendency of anthropomorphizing their machines and giving them malevolent motives when they're trying to kill us. But we tend to forget the people who design these machines in the first place. Fiction is replete with stories of mad scientists and evil corporations building robot armies with the express purpose of control and conquest, and yes, that's scary. But what is more relatable, and even scarier, is killer machines that result from short-sighted arrogance. Gable, the inventor of this story, is a perfect example. He thinks his mechanical dancing partner will just be like his other creations that perform their one task perfectly. It's just dancing after all. Ordinary people can dance, so how hard can it be? He's been a genius for so long, he assumes everything he makes will be flawless. It doesn't need testing, it doesn't need a timer to shut down, it doesn't need an easy-to-use off switch. Everything is fine. Until it isn't. Until his pride causes someone else to fall. At least Gable has the good sense to stop when he learns his lesson. You can't say that for a lot of people who are so caught up in their own mythology, they don't realize the dance should have stopped a long time ago. But what did you think of this story? If you're a Patreon subscriber, we encourage you to pop over to our Discord channel and tell us. And on the subject of subscribing and support, PseudoPod is funded by you, our listeners. We pay everyone, and we're very proud of that, but it relies on your generosity. As always, if you can, please go to pseudopod.org and donate by clicking on Feed the Pod. If you can't afford to do that, and we get it, times are insane, then please consider leaving reviews of our episodes, tweeting about them, or generally making a noise on whatever form of social media seems the least awful this week. And if you like merch, and who doesn't, Escape Artist has a Void merch store with a huge range of fabulous hoodies, t-shirts, and other goodies. The link is in various places, including our pinned tweet. Check it out. PseudoPod is a part of Escape Artist Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Non-Derivatives 4.0 International License. Download and listen to this episode on any device you like, but don't change it or sell it. Theme music is by permission of Anger's Manga. We leave you with a closing quote from B.F. Skinner. The real problem is not whether machines think, it's whether men do. See you soon, folks. Take care. Stay safe.
An arm appeared from nowhere on the shape, seemingly projected like the pseudopod of a protozoan.
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.